Hello, everybody. I'm here with film director Max Good. We're going to discuss some of the new JFK files, some of which do pertain to his great documentary film called The Assassination and Mrs. Paine. Mrs. Paine is who took Oswald to Dallas and got Oswald that job in the Texas Book Depository before the assassination. And so many CIA connections. But I have to tell you, this film is it's impressive how objective it is. It's just great research. So, Max, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, Matt. Great to be here. And these document releases have been interesting. You know, I didn't expect any bombshells, but I'm glad it's generating interest for people who might normally not pay attention to this.
And you know, here's the thing, Max. Like, there's so much evidence that's already been out, even that people just aren't familiar with. And I think your film does a really good job of sharing and explaining a lot of what that evidence is. That's just still just people aren't aware of it. It's pretty incredible stuff. I'm going to play the trailer for your film right now to pique everyone's interest. Here we go. Whoop. There we go.
Yes.
I first read about Ruth Paine 10 years ago. I was surprised to find that this sweet old Quaker woman has been suspected of playing a role in the JFK assassination.
The president was hit in the head.
I'm woven into a lot of people's conspiracy theories.
I think there's certain soft spots where she's lying.
You actually might find one of the real keys to the Kennedy case.
Ruth and Michael Paine are do-gooders whom nobody would have ever heard of if it hadn't been for the accident that one of the people they helped out in life was Lee Harvey Oswald.
One of the officers asked if he had any guns, and I said no.
It was a coup. You can't close the circle without the Paines.
Who is likely to have wanted Kennedy dead? You'd have to say the CIA, but perhaps also the military as well.
It's not mom apple pie in America to think things like that.
A little poll here. How many of you people think there was a conspiracy?
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised.
The Warren Commission withheld mountains of evidence from the public.
Everything I saw pointed to him and him alone.
She's been a disinformation agent.
The veneer has come off Ruth and Michael Paine. I mean, they're just not credible anymore.
Is it a coincidence that it was you, Mrs. Paine, who directed Lee to the job in the school book depository? And it's just a coincidence that the gun that supposedly killed the president was located in your house? All of these things just sort of happened all around you.
Were the last telephone calls that Lee Oswald made to anybody in the world, and they were to Ruth Paine, and the only person who can say what Oswald said is Ruth.
You are not an agent for the CIA, are you?
No.
You are not an agent for the KGB, are you?
No.
Are you laughing again?
Excuse me. No.
Who are you going to believe? I mean, really.
Long term, I'm hoping that real history will prevail.
It's so easy to justify what you do. It is for any of us.
All right.
Available now on video on demand.
So, how did you, what piqued your interest in the JFK assassination, and what made you get so inspired and curious to follow up and befriend one of the few people who's still alive with such a key role, seemingly, in how things played out?
Yeah, well, I'd say I came of age 20 years ago. I lived in New York. I lived through 9/11 there, and I started to learn about some of these alternative perspectives, hidden history, whatever you want to call it. And I had some friends who were deeply involved with the JFK assassination research. And at that point, I didn't really feel like I knew much about it. But I recognized, there's something there. You should probably, learn a bit more about it. And it was probably around 2008 that I read a book called JFK and the Unspeakable by James Douglas. And this book, had sort of a breakthrough popularity. And, books about the JFK assassination come out every single year. There are actually thousands of books on the JFK assassination. So it's kind of a flooded market. But this book was different. It was by a, anti-war activist, and he spent years researching and putting this book together. I recommend it to everybody. And it was in that book that I first learned about Ruth and Michael Paine. And, on top of everything else, you learn about the assassination, all these CIA connections, these questions about Oswald and the magic bullets and how the whole thing went down. And then you learn that Ruth and Michael Paine, Ruth Paine took in Marina Oswald and Lee Harvey Oswald to basically live with her in the months before the assassination. And she and her husband, their families have direct connections to the CIA. And it just, on top of everything else, it just kind of blows you away. And it wasn't just that. She, like you mentioned, she got Oswald the job at the book depository. She made the initial call there to try to get him the job. And she also was instrumental in finding some of the key evidence against Oswald. And a lot of that evidence against him came out of her house, her garage. Yeah.
And one weird thing about, or sketchy thing about that is the some of the evidence she found, she didn't give to police right away. There was like a delay, right? She gave it to the FBI at a later date. Like, it just seems kind of sketch.
She had a questionable kind of close relationship with the FBI. They came out to her house to ask about Oswald. And she talked to them on a couple occasions when he wasn't home, and then she did a very suspicious thing. According to her account of it, is she basically stole a letter that he had been writing on her typewriter and read it and thought it was suspicious and saved it to give to the FBI. And yes, that's before the assassination. And after the assassination, this is
she took the letter significantly. Before the assassination, she's already the story is she's gathering evidence against him.
This is all in the like month or two before the assassination, or weeks or months. And so when the police first arrived on the day of the assassination to search the house, she didn't hand over that letter to them. She waited until the FBI came later to give it to them. I think you can say without exaggeration that she was informing on Oswald to the FBI. Some people might try to word it differently, but I think that sums up what she was doing.
Now, so we talk about all these CIA connections. One of them being Oswald himself, right? Can you kind of lay that down? I mean, there's just so many, but you want to, start with Oswald and then get to Ruth's you know, family connections.
Yeah. So
just like for people who are fairly new to this, like me, just what is the general theory of the CIA being behind this and Oswald?
So the general theory is that Oswald was working for the U.S. government, the CIA, or naval intelligence and FBI, some form of intelligence, probably maybe a combination of different agencies, but that he was a former Marine, and he then defected to Russia, in the late 50s. And there's a lot of evidence that he was probably a fake defector sent there to gather intelligence. So he was a spy the whole time. He pretended to be a communist. A lot of the stuff he did, he started his own chapter of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, which, was heavily infiltrated already. But
by the CIA.
Yes. So when he was in the Marines, he was stationed in Japan, and at a CIA spy base where they were operating the U-2 spy planes, which were flying over Russia. This is all, real key stuff in the Cold War. And he happened to be working at this place, this base, and then not long after he goes to Russia, there's real questions about how he gets there, who pays for his trip there, but yeah.
And isn't there a new document, or maybe it's not new, but there's a document in the JFK files of the CIA discussing how they have to squash this story coming out of Japan reporting Oswald's CIA connections?
Yeah, that's right. There was one of his commanding officers, somebody who was in the military with him there in Japan, was doing an interview with some local journalist, and we got a new CIA document explaining how they wanted to squash this, and different strategies to squash this story. So basically the theory is that he was working for intelligence, U.S. intelligence, right up until the day of the assassination, that he had these communist credentials to infiltrate the radical circles, and then those could be used to kind of frame him as a communist. But when you start digging into them, none of it really makes sense. You got to wonder if he was probably a patriotic guy who was working for the government fighting communism as a spy. And he kind of becomes the perfect patsy, because you can tie him to your biggest enemy. And then, there's all kinds of other CIA connections. George de Mohrenschildt is one of my favorites, who was Oswald's best friend in Dallas. He was this, middle-aged, very high-class oil man who was originally Russian. He's one of the White Russians, this, against the revolution, loyal to the elites and the Tsar. And somehow he's Oswald's best friend in Dallas. They're hanging out. He's helping them. He's taking Marina, to the doctor and stuff. And Oswald's only 24 years old at this point. He's supposed to be some, dirty little communist. It doesn't make any sense. And de Mohrenschildt is confirmed. The CIA in their own documents admit he was. They call him an unpaid informant, but that's confirmed. He had a relationship with the CIA, and he even claimed that the local head of the local CIA office, this guy named J. Walton Moore, he claims that guy told him to befriend Oswald. You can't always trust everything you hear, but I think.
But that's official testimony from the guy. But that is official testimony, right? Yeah.
Well, in his book, that's what he says. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And you have to think, well, okay. And then the story gets a little even. I'll just play a clip from Max's movie for a little more about George. And George is who introduced Oswald to Mrs. Paine, right?
That's correct.
So here's the clip from the documentary.
With Marina in the bedroom with the baby.
De Mohrenschildt.
I wasn't. That's weird. Hold on. Technical difficulties. Let's try that again. There you go.
It was through the auspices of George de Mohrenschildt that Ruth and Michael Paine are introduced to the Oswalds.
Oswald becomes chummy with the white Russian community of Dallas, all rabid anti-communist. It's odd. His closest friend is an oil man named George de Mohrenschildt, who's about 35 years older than Oswald, who is only 23 and supposedly broke.
I think the only time I met George de Mohrenschildt was at this party in February. And he and his wife, Jean, were there. But I didn't hear much from them because I spent most of the evening with Marina in the bedroom with the baby.
De Mohrenschildt is a member of the Dallas Petroleum Club, speaks 5 languages, and was in French Vichy intelligence during the war. Also rumored to have been a Nazi sympathizer.
We met Oswald in the summer of 1962 when we heard that there was a young couple who arrived from Russia and were in very difficult financial condition.
Why would a white Russian who is vehemently anti-communist associate with Oswald?
I don't know. Good question. Not one I asked.
Now, it would seem like the obvious question to ask.
Sure. I just want to mention, I don't know who's listening here, but yeah, Oliver Stone's JFK is actually full of a lot of great information. I just think if you haven't researched the assassination, you don't know the difference between the fact and fiction in that movie. But it's definitely it's based on factual information, and all that stuff about de Mohrenschildt is true. And Ruth, in that clip you just played, is one of the few examples where you can pin her down in a falsehood, or maybe a lie if you want to call it that. But she said she thinks she only met de Mohrenschildt only once, but in fact she met him again later. Post-assassination, there were some of these famous backyard photos surfaced in a storage unit or something, and she had a meeting with George de Mohrenschildt to talk about this. So yeah, I've tried many times to keep track of does her story hold up, and mostly she is pretty solid. Never
sticks to her script.
Never contradicts herself. And yeah, she's a tough cookie. A lot of people feel like she's honest, and they totally believe her. And I think it's if you take just a kind of the general public and they watch my film, I think it's about 50-50 people think Ruth is lying about something, and those who think no, there's no way, she's just an honest lady who got caught up in this.
Well, I could see that because you do a good job of, you know, giving both sides of the story. But I think for people who are open-minded and who aren't already primed to believe one side or the other, I'll say myself, I like to think that you got me interested. It definitely seemed, I became very curious. It seemed like a curious story, obviously a key character. And even if she personally, you know, whether she personally knew what was going on or not, the connections are indisputable. The CIA's fingerprints are all over it. Like we said, introduced by somebody who's an informant for she was introduced to Oswald by a CIA informant. There's all this evidence that Oswald himself was CIA. We know that the CIA was monitoring Oswald for years. Is that right? And so, by the way, so with all the records of years of monitoring Oswald, like, has that been released, or like, do we know if that exists?
Well, some of it has been released. There's something called his Oswald's 201 file, and we have, you know, a lot of these files, although it's definitely not complete. In fact, I just posted something on Twitter today where there's a whole volume of a Oswald file that somehow disappeared between the 70s and now. Somebody for the House Select Committee on Assassinations investigated this in the 70s, and one of their staffers were able to review this particular part of this file and make notes on it and stuff. And then later, CIA claimed, "Oh, it doesn't exist." So we lost that, and there are a lot of files like that. There are Army intelligence files on Oswald that they claim, "Oh, we just destroyed those. It was just routine maintenance on our files. We destroyed
It's totally normal and regular to delete information on the assassination, you know, the alleged assassin of the President of the United States of America. It's just totally normal for our security, you know, our intelligence and security services to delete information to help them solve, you know, to figure out who killed the President of the United States, which, you know, we thought was their job. But anyway.
Yeah, I think people need to recognize that the files we're getting are not complete. And all this stuff, you know, that we were trying to get is just the stuff that was part of the JFK Records Act passed in 1992 after Oliver Stone's film. That's not everything related to this. It's just, you know, what they were able to put into their request. And, you know, certain things were rejected. They didn't know about other things. I mean, you'll see references to other files like this. You know, I was looking at this file on this character, Priscilla Johnson McMillan, in my film, who it's actually somebody's notes from the House Select Committee who was reviewing the CIA files on her. But we don't have all those original CIA files. Somehow those were kept out of the JFK Records Act. They said, you know, they weren't related, or, you know, there was national security grounds. All kinds of files on Ruth's family are not included in this, that, you know, people can try to go after them with FOIA requests. But this is, you know, this is like decades long dribbling out of files. You know, infamously, the head of the Warren Commission, Earl Warren, said way back then, he said, you know, they asked him if the public will ever get all the files on this. And he said, there may come a time, but it won't be in your lifetime. And we've gotten a lot of new stuff over the last few years, but, you know, much has been destroyed. And I think there's part of this this dribbling out of documents actually has played a role in like people just feeling like, okay, we'll wait and see what happens. You know, the fact is we've had enough factual documentary evidence on this, you know, since like the release of the Warren Commission report, where, you know, they published a lot of their, you know, full interviews and their exhibits and stuff. And the earliest critics of the Warren Commission, they felt like once you start digging into the actual data, you come to a completely opposite conclusion of what they made. You know, the actual evidence points to a conspiracy, not one lone nut.
Yeah, and the Warren Commission headed by the former director of the CIA, right? Allen Dulles. Correct?
Yeah, he wasn't the head of it, but he he was the most.
He played a lead
active
role.
Yeah, he was most active. You know,
I thought Doug Warren was the head of it, I suppose.
Yeah.
But yeah. So gosh, yeah. Well, speaking of Allen Dulles has connections to Ruth Paine, knew Ruth Paine's mother-in-law, and perfect moment to key up another scene from Max's documentary film, The Assassination and Mrs. Paine.
And he spent summers on the... Michael Paine's mother was a Forbes, and he spent summers on Nishan Island since childhood. One of his mother's closest friends was a woman named Mary Bancroft. Bancroft was a spy and longtime mistress of CIA Director Allen Dulles. Dulles and Bancroft were invited to stay on Nishan Island.
Mary Bancroft knew the Paines intimately and saw Michael at a young age. And so she could turn to her partner, Allen Dulles, and tell him, you want some people on the left, I know some people on the left that could be a big help to you. So you got a direct line to the top of the CIA right there, which I think is the most telling thing of all of the Paine saga.
Nishan Island was kind of a hideaway for these extraordinarily wealthy people, people with tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. Ruth Paine visited Nishan Island that summer of 1963, even though she's supposed to be estranged from her husband.
While you're making connections, my mother-in-law knew Allen Dulles. So obviously there's a plot.
God damn, what a that's quite a bite, Max. quite an interview bite right there.
Yeah, I mean, nobody would think that was suspicious, you know, that her mother-in-law knew Allen Dulles. Yeah.
And for those who don't know, Allen Dulles would, you know, he was fired by JFK, so he certainly has a vendetta against JFK. Him and the other, him being the director of the CIA and the other two highest people at the CIA, and I think, God, was one of them like a brother of the mayor of Dallas, something like that. Anyway, these. So so gosh, I mean the CIA it's just everywhere. What else? Okay. Well, Ruth's mother-in-law. That's now who connects Ruth to her mother-in-law? Well, her husband. Now her husband also has intelligence connections. Can you explain that? Michael Paine.
Yeah. So Michael Paine, very intriguing character as well. He, first of all, you got to realize the Paines are living at this point in Dallas in a real small, modest house, working class suburb, Irving, Texas. And in fact, they are both from, you know, highly educated, elite type families. Michael attended school at Harvard like every other man in his family. He's from the Forbes family and also the Paine and Emerson and Cabot families. These guys like got a total Boston Brahmin Eastern establishment pedigree. But his mother was Ruth Forbes, and one of her best friends was a spy named Mary Bancroft, and Mary Bancroft happened to be the longtime mistress and colleague of Allen Dulles, the head of the CIA. So, yeah, there's a connection right there. You also have a real strange fact that Michael Paine, Ruth and Michael are on the surface are supposed to be Quakers, Unitarian, kind of liberal pacifist types. Yet Michael Paine works for a military contractor in Dallas, Bell Helicopter, which manufactured, the Huey helicopter that was used widely in Vietnam. And he's got a security clearance at his job. So
big.
That's
huge. Huge.
He's got a security clearance, and yet somehow they invite a young communist to live in their house. Michael and Ruth are separated at this point. He's not living in the house, but they're still friendly. He still comes over sometimes. Conveniently, he cleared us out of the house, and then Marina Oswald moves in. Oswald spends weekends there.
That's so interesting. It's like they're acting as a couple, with this other couple, right? Even though they're broken up, it's kind of odd to me. It's like they're socializing as couples when but they've broken up. Why would they be doing that? What it's, I don't know. It's almost, anyway. It's because if it's not actual, a normal, that just doesn't sound like a normal, natural relationship that would occur, right? Sounds more like work, but anyway, that's just if they're really broken up, and they were.
I guess also we should mention that Ruth Paine speaks Russian. She started studying Russian when she was younger, college age, and she's fairly good. She had even taught Russian a bit, and so she was able to speak Russian with Oswald and Marina.
And there is evidence that even Ruth Paine herself was working like some CIA, doing some CIA work. But before we get to that, even was it Michael's father worked for U.S. Aid? Is that right?
That's Ruth's father.
Ruth's father, even closer. And we know, U.S. Aid. It's like a cover, a very common cover for CIA agents, just like the State Department. This is widely known at this point.
Yeah, I think during this point in the Cold War, there was a lot of recruiting of people who were on what was called the non-communist left. So they're fighting, the Cold War against communism in Russia, and they wanted to recruit people who maybe were socialists, democratic socialists, or just sort of on the more moderate side of the left, but who were definitely anti-communists. Today, some of these gradations might not be as clear to us, but back then it was pretty defined, like if you were a actual communist or not. And Ruth's family sort of falls into this non-communist left category. Her parents supposedly were voted for the socialist candidate for president, Norman Thomas. He ran for president many times. He also, just as an aside, received CIA funding.
Oh, jeez. So it just never ends, guys. I'm not exaggerating. Like, it could go on and on. Like, the people who are connected work like verifiably their work with the CIA. Like, it's incredible. And speaking of which, how about Ruth's sister?
Yeah.
Ruth's sister. Now this is just verifiable. It's anyway. I'll let you go ahead, Max.
Yeah. Well, back to her father. So her father worked at USAID. His name is William Avery Hyde. He was an insurance executive, but for USAID, he was going around the world supposedly setting up these cooperatives to help other countries develop their economies and stuff. Yet we do have a document, it's in my film, showing that he was at least recruited for CIA assignments in Vietnam in the late 50s. And this document says he wasn't used for those assignments. But we do know his reports were from his work in all these countries. He did a lot of work in Latin America, in the third world. And his reports were rooted to CIA. So, yes, that's a connection there.
Yeah.
Her sister, Sylvia Hyde Hoke, was confirmed CIA. It's not disputed, it's documented. She supposedly worked as a psychologist for the CIA. Ruth is very hesitant to admit it or talk about it. She usually tries to play it off. But yeah, her sister worked for the Air Force and the CIA. And I believe there's documents that she might have been working for naval intelligence at some point. So yeah, there's just all around both sides of the family. Yeah, both Michael and Ruth. And
as close to Alan Dulles, the director of the CIA. I mean, it's and I have a clip of where you kind of explain the sisters connection, and that Ruth spent time with her sister shortly before picking up Oswald. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's not like she's just some estranged, member of her family. Yeah, she went on this big road trip in the summer of '63, which culminates with her picking up Marina in New Orleans and bringing her back to Dallas to live in her house. And she visited her sister on that trip.
All right, Marina Oswald. All right, here you go, guys.
It seems that sometimes it's families that are employed within the intelligence community.
Whole families?
Yeah, multiple members of the family.
You mean, therefore, I wasn't also?
That's one of the accusations.
I see.
In the summer of 1963, Ruth Paine set out on a long road trip to visit friends and relatives. She stayed on Nishan Island and later spent several days at her sister's house in the Washington, D.C. area. Her last stop in late September was to pick up Marina Oswald in New Orleans and bring her and the Oswald's belongings back to Dallas. It's right around this time that Lee Oswald allegedly visits the Soviet embassy in Mexico City, although we know that even J. Edgar Hoover had doubts about that. By early October, Oswald is back in Dallas, where Ruth soon helps him get the job at the book depository. 5 weeks later, the president is dead. Do you see why people take these connections as being suspicious?
Sure. Yeah. Long term, I'm hoping that real history will prevail. Max Holland has been a researcher especially looking at what the Warren Commission did and what they didn't do, what they knew and what they didn't know. That's good research.
I have met Ruth.
All right. So again, now guess who the researcher that Ruth Paine recommends is connected to the CIA. You want to explain that?
Yeah,
Max?
two of them, in fact, who I interview in the movie. The two main researchers Ruth would recommend would be Max Hollins and Priscilla Johnson McMillan. Max Hollins, actually, his articles about the assassination were published on the CIA's website, and he won an award from the CIA and got a $1,000 prize. So people have some suspicions about him. He used to write for The Nation. He somehow became a pundit on the JFK assassination who gets quoted and interviewed. And Priscilla Johnson McMillan has much deeper connection to this case. She just died a few years ago, but she interviewed Oswald when he defected to Russia. She was working as a journalist in Russia, and she interviewed him, published stories about him in the newspaper. And then later on, somehow, she befriends Marina Oswald, and Marina Oswald picks her as the person to write basically her memoir of what happened. And she becomes best friends with Marina Oswald for years, and finally releases a book in the 70s, right around the time that the House Select Committee is happening, and there's all this uproar and suspicion over the JFK assassination. Her book comes out saying, it was a lone nut, it was Oswald, Marina says so, here's the story. And of course, Priscilla, as we found out later, was a witting, in the documents it says she was a witting collaborator of the CIA, and she applied to work for the CIA as early as like 1952 or something.
And that just came out, right, in the new JFK files? Or some new stuff? Was that not in there?
Some new stuff came out about her. Some specifics about what the CIA was using her for, and what she was involved with. She was writing, CIA was funding all kinds of journalism. They had all kinds of contacts, and they even funded certain media outlets to give a more pro-American, anti-Soviet perspective.
And I mean, really, whatever narrative the intelligence community wanted to put out that day, and obviously, in this case, they were setting the stage and playing out the narrative that Oswald was, a communist with Soviet connections. And Priscilla, obviously, she that's the story she sang. And surprise, surprise, she was funded by the CIA the whole time, backed by them. I have a clip from the doc so people can see who we're talking about as I key it up. Let's see.
Yeah, I'm going to go grab that book over here.
Okay.
My guest this morning is Priscilla Johnson McMillan, the author of Marina and Lee.
Here we go. So this is that so-called journalist who is wittingly working with the CIA. Like it's documented. That's in the files. So here you go. And as you will see from this clip from Max's documentary, she got a lot of media attention to push that narrative that Lee was a commie with Soviet connections.
My guest this morning is Priscilla Johnson McMillan, the author of Marina and Lee. I want to talk to you about the time you interviewed Lee Harvey Oswald in Russia.
Yes.
What kind of a man was he?
Forlorn, lonely, pathetic, lost, seeming to need help.
I returned to Russia in 1958. It was during that time that I met Lee Harvey Oswald. I wrote a story about him as a defector who was very unusual, if not non-existent at that time, someone who claimed that he wanted to live permanently in the Soviet Union because he was a Marxist. He said he hated the United States and that the Russians he dealt with had all treated him very well. He did tell me that he would give the Russians any secrets that he possessed. But I assumed he didn't possess any. I could see that he was angry, but not off the scale angry. In fact, I thought it might be acting a little bit.
Interesting.
It's just a little too contrived that you happen to know Oswald in Russia, that you then wrote a book absolving all of those people who are suspected in conspiracies, that you happened to work for the State Department, and that you I happened to notice the initials CIA tattooed on your back.
Well, I translated.
Yep, the late night comedy has always been very, very. Look, I mean, he's just doing the job of the CIA. He's just dismissing all the very real reasons, all the actual evidence that suggests she's and now proves that she was working for the CIA. And I don't know, anybody who's been paying attention to the news media, like during the last several years, unfortunately, it's the same thing. A lot of late night comedians are just, I mean, I don't know if it's wittingly or unwittingly, but also working for the CIA.
For the State Department. Well, I translated for the State Department for a month in 1956, but 3 years before I became a journalist, and I would never have done such a thing, wear two hats.
In 1967, Joseph Stalin's daughter defected to the U.S. The person the CIA selected to help her put out a book on the horrors of Russian communism was Priscilla Johnson Macmillan.
I did translate Svetlana Alliluyev's book, and I didn't know it at the time, but that was a CIA operation from the get-go. You didn't need to know that story, but I certainly wouldn't tell it to the conspiracy theorists either. They wouldn't know what to make of it. Do you know what I mean? It's too complicated.
Yes, it's very complicated. It's very complicated. I mean, you know, CIA's paying a journalist secretly to write, to propagate this story that they want everybody to believe. It's just very complicated, right? I mean, anyway.
Yeah, here's Priscilla's book. Sorry if it's blurring out, but it's called Marina and Lee. And this book, of course, the book's written by the people who support the official story. They get pushed, you know, huge in the corporate media. Same thing with Gerald Posner's Case Closed in 1993. But this book was republished in 2013, originally from the 70s, and it has a foreword by a guy named Joseph Finder. And if you look him up on Wikipedia, you'll find that he's also former CIA.
Wow. Wow. It's just amazing. Oh. And then another big one. I do have one more clip, and this is of you explain how the CIA was monitoring Ruth and Michael Paine, right? And they record, and it's transcribed, a conversation they have just an hour, or not even, after the assassination. And they say, "We know who did it." Just an hour after the assassination. Come on. Does that not pique your interest, guys? Does that not make you wonder? And I I don't know, to give it a little more context, I'll play the clip and let Max add whatever he likes. Again, another clip from Max's film, The Assassination and Mrs. Paine.
Michael called. Soon after the assassination, Michael calls Ruth from his job at Bell Helicopter. Declassified FBI documents reveal that their conversation was being monitored. An informant reported that Michael was overheard to comment that he felt sure Lee Harvey Oswald had killed the president, but did not feel Oswald was responsible, and further stated, "We both know who is responsible."
According to the records, that phone call was made about an hour after the assassination, which means it was a few minutes before Oswald was actually arrested for the crime.
Pure garbage. Pure garbage. I did describe the phone call that Michael and I had after the assassination when we were kind of commiserating with each other about Kennedy's killing and thinking that it was conspiracy, right-wing radicals who had done it. So we both thought we knew, but we didn't know who had done it. I hear that every now and then. That one comes up, yeah. But just nothing to it.
Another good scene, good explanation, and yeah, Max doing, as the objective filmmaker he is, obligated to give you Ruth's reaction, and it leaves it up to the viewers. What do you guys think? Anything you'd like to add, Max?
Yeah, I thought it was real important to give the audience the chance to be critical thinkers when watching this movie. I didn't want to put out a piece of propaganda, whether it's, from one side or the other. You can be a propagandist, even, trying to spread the truth or being on the right side of an issue. But you want people to actually understand what's going on and go through a process in their mind where they can weigh real evidence and judge for themselves. So yeah, I thought it was important to have the voices representing the official story, including Ruth. She gets a lot of screen time to explain her position and why she thinks Oswald did it alone, and she knows, she was close to him, she saw all kinds of things. And Priscilla Johnson McMillan, Max Holland, Gerald Posner, they all get to say their piece in this film. And
Gerald Posner, sorry to cut you off, but Gerald Posner is somebody. So even with this new JFK Files release, that was a name I saw a lot of people say, read Gerald Posner. He's one of the main sources, most popular sources defending the official narrative. And so, yeah, these are the people that Max interviewed in the film in addition to the skeptics.
Yeah, Posner's kind of one of the go-to guys to defend the official story. He'll be on, CNN or whatever talking about this. He put out a book called Case Closed in '93 after Oliver Stone's film came out, rekindled interest in this issue. And of course, that book was promoted like hell, became a huge bestseller. And he's still, to this day, he and the people like him get a disproportionate amount of media time to expound on their position when, 90 something% of all the serious researchers dedicated to looking at this come out with a conspiracy conclusion. So yeah, you got to wonder are you getting honest information about this? But yeah, I kind of hid my own perspective on this when putting the film together. I'd actually wanted the viewer to not be sure what position I was coming from, where the film was coming from. So I left things in here and there that might confuse you, like, oh yeah, he's supporting the official story. And I just was kind of trying to provoke people to think for themselves.
Yeah, it's like it's a mystery. It's a mystery movie, and kept my interest. Very, very interesting. And I mean, gosh, from what you guys have seen with the few clips we've played, Ruth pretty much keeps her composure, but there is a scene where, Max, you finally do just ask her straight up, do you have some connection with the CIA? And she does very briefly lose her cool, very briefly, but it's so what did she do? She just called you a flake pretty just like as you're asking the question very calmly, like, and you could see just the anger in her face. Like, anyway, God, how was that? Like, and did that ruin your relationship? Because you did befriend her, you followed her around for quite a while to get these interviews and to document her story.
Yeah, I did befriend her, and she was always very open, very civil. She was very patient even after that. I was worried that when I brought up some of those questions, she might just walk off and that would be it. But even after I, did that, she was still fairly friendly. There was a certain point where I asked her if we could do some more filming, and she said no. So yeah, she realized the film was going to actually not just kind of make fun of these theories that she had some, CIA connection, or, that I was looking at it and taking it seriously and trying to show both sides. She didn't like that. But yeah, she never really got flustered. Yeah, you could maybe a little bit
that moment, last for
scene.
Sure. In that moment, yeah.
She is tough. She's extremely intelligent. She was, she was 82 when I started filming with her, and then 87 or something by the time I was done. And she's extremely sharp and really strong person. I have respect for her on a certain level that she's she's been through a lot.
I want to be that together at that age.
Yeah, and she's you can imagine the pressure on her and dealing with these people who totally think she's lying, and just somehow being willing to at least talk about it. I got a lot of respect for that, because she could have just shut up a long time ago. Sometimes I wonder if she's under some sort of threat or signed some oath, and she cannot ever say anything about it, but that she secretly wants the truth to come out.
And I got to say, there is more reason for you to ask that question of her. Is there any way you're connected to the CIA beyond just the people connected to her, who very closely connected to her, who are CIA? And that is a trip she took in the 90s, 91 or so, to Nicaragua. And questions that there are some, legitimate questions as to whether that was part of an intelligence operation. Can you discuss that?
Yeah, so she was involved with this Quaker charity group called Pro Nika, who were doing aid in the 80s and 90s. Even up until recently, they were still working in Nicaragua. And this is around the time of the Iran-Contra affair and the CIA's funding the Contra guerrillas against the Sandinista revolution, the socialist revolution, left wing in Nicaragua. So she went down there and was doing work, and people became very suspicious of her behavior, that she was taking notes, and that she, there was some reports that certain people she had talked to then were raided by the authorities. It was people she knew people in the embassy down there, which other activists thought was suspicious. And they basically, some of these other activists she was working with, they basically said, like, we don't want to have anything to do with her. Like, send her away somewhere because we don't trust this woman. And yeah, I don't know. Maybe some of these people had heard of her and her association with the JFK assassination, and that's why they were suspicious. From what I hear, that's not true of all of them. Some of them just thought her behavior was suspicious. I don't know. It's just interesting information that I think is worth taking in.
Yeah. And you talked to two people who were on that, two activists who were with her on that trip. And I saw on your Patreon, you have another interview. I don't know if that's the same guy that was, blurred in the documentary film, or is that a third person?
That's a third person.
Okay.
I think
that was on this trip with Ruth. Or was
he worked with Ruth, maybe in Florida. She lived in St. Petersburg, Florida at that point, and they would go down to Nicaragua from there. Okay. He worked with her there. He was also a Quaker, and he had some serious suspicions and accusations against her.
Very
and
strong
the Quakers.
Accusations. Yeah, just straight up, he said that she was CIA. Now that didn't make it into the film because I know you were very careful to put only like the strongest or stuff that had some backing to it.
Yeah,
not
tried
empty
to
accusations. Yeah,
I tried to corroborate everything in there, and his story I was not really able to corroborate that well, but it's definitely interesting.
Yeah. And I'm trying to understand, so just the setting. So she goes to Nicaragua, and what was as part of this group Pro Nika, but what was she there to help the Contras, or who was she helping?
Well, Pro Nika was definitely down there to help the Sandinistas. Yeah. So the CIA is fighting, is supporting the Contras. So
yes,
you could imagine there might be some conflict between U.S. charity groups going down there, supporting the faction that the CIA is fighting against.
But that also makes me, that seems curious to me, because like, isn't Ruth an anti-communist, right? Or no?
She's definitely an anti-communist.
So it just seems odd to me. But go, what do you think?
I think these people make some sort of distinction between socialist and communist.
Okay.
For the average person, it might be.
But
hard
the Sandinistas, I mean, were they? I wouldn't call them like democratic socialists, like a Bernie Sanders necessarily, or a. I mean. No, it seems like they were a little more than that, but maybe.
I'm not an expert on the Sandinistas, but I believe they would probably call themselves socialists, not communists. But
okay. So let's see how Was there any other questions I had, man? Anything else you want to mention? As we
I just wanted to say that, you know, this files release, I think people need to look at it from a broader perspective, like in historically, and how it operates. I mean, obviously for the Trump administration, this is part of their push to have credentials as being anti-deep state or something. But if you look, you know, recently Trump just said that he thinks Oswald did it alone, and he's always thought that. And he said, looks like these files were nothing spectacular came out, and maybe that's the best thing. So
who said that?
You know,
who said that?
Trump.
He said that maybe Oswald did. I thought he said he might have had some help at least, right?
Yeah, he said he might have had some help.
Yeah,
but
still, like I guess you're right. It's still pushing the narrative that Oswald's the main man.
Yeah, I think you got to realize it's
alone.
A lot of this stuff is operating for propaganda purposes. You know, it's either to, you know, boost Trump's popularity within the kind of anti-establishment circles. It also these files, just like dribbling them out for decades and decades, there will always be more. There still are more. And some people will say, oh, wow, when we finally get those ones, it'll be proven. You got to think, we don't need more files. We had enough, 60 years ago. What you need is an actual justice. You know, you need a new
accountability. Yeah.
Truth and Reconciliation Commission or some actual government body that's not corrupt, that's going to get the truth and justice for this, you know, crime against democracy, and the cover up that's happened ever since. And it's so deep, you know, all the media are implicated, all the institutions in America are basically have gone along with this, that it's so hard to even imagine this coming out. It's like we had a coup in this country in 1963, and it's been covered up ever since. It's like the country. A lot of people think the country could never face it until there's some sort of, you know, actual revolution. But I think the files are kind of a distraction in a way, and people. I'm glad to see people getting interested. I think they should watch some documentaries like mine, or there's other good ones. There's great books, but really, you know, the point of this, once you've done a bit of research, is, you know, our system is corrupt. We don't have a democracy anymore, and, you know, just like the most basic truth of our own history is hidden from us.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible stuff. People just aren't aware of the evidence that's already out there, like I said before. And we didn't really talk motive so much. I mean, the reason the CIA would coup JFK is because JFK wanted to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces. That's a real quote. And one of the new things, and why? Because they screwed him over at the Bay of Pigs invasion. They basically assured him, "Oh, this will go fine, Mr. President." You know, planning secretly that this will go fine without like more intervention, without, you know, overt military. And and then they secretly thought, like, okay, as soon as we launch this failed invasion of Cuba, surely the president will be pressured to up the ante and have us go all in, or supply air support and more. And JFK just wasn't having it. He's like, you motherfuckers, you fucking lied to me. You told me this was going to go. All right. And so, people hear that and go, well, yeah, JFK, oh yeah, he was convinced by the CIA to go along with an invasion of Cuba, but he had a hard line. And part of that hard line was, no, he didn't want to be involved in Vietnam. And we know as one of the first things LBJ did when he took over after JFK was assassinated was to basically eliminate one of JFK's orders to take everything out of Vietnam, to end involvement in Vietnam. So that's very significant. And then what we just have seen with this new release is a full report or memo. What would you call it, from Arthur Schlesinger, which is JFK's national security advisor, explaining how out of control the CIA is and how it has to be, just taken under control. What have you been able to look through that, Max? You want to comment on like what the motivations behind the assassination?
Yeah, I've been looking a little bit at this Schlesinger
yes.
Memo, and yeah, I mean, the idea behind the motivation is that JFK may have started out as a Cold Warrior, as maybe a more traditional establishment politician, but he had some awakening, and this is talked about in that book, JFK and the Unspeakable. Some people call it his turning towards peace, especially after the Cuban Missile Crisis, where we came within inches of nuclear war, that he sort of decided, we can't go down that path. And all these militaristic people in the CIA and the army, the military, just, he stopped trusting them. And he also, if you look at his policies, he was definitely trying to end colonialism, imperialism. He was usually on the side of the,
anti-war
movements. Yeah, the movements around the world where, these people were trying to take control of their own countries. He supported that. And if you listen to his famous peace speech at American University and talking about disarmament, I mean, he did do a nuclear test ban treaty that was later rescinded, after he was killed. I mean, I don't think these were empty words. I think he really was trying to drive towards peace, and he wanted to end the military industrial complex and all the waste, the trillions and trillions that have been wasted on bombs and war and destruction over the last 60 years. I mean, imagine the world we could have lived in if things weren't oriented towards war.
Yeah.
And there was a huge motivation to people were making a lot of money, and they had very, war hawk type views, and that's why people think that JFK was taken out.
People like Michael Paine of Bella Helicopters. All right. Well, thanks everyone for watching. Thank you, Max, for joining me. And yeah, I can't recommend the film enough. Everybody can check that out. Please subscribe to me. I promise I'll have some more mashup videos. Not, I know the interviews aren't the normal thing, but I just, with the new JFK files, I just thought it was a great opportunity to promote Max's documentary and discuss. Well, with that, do you want to point anybody to your X account or somewhere else, Max?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. You can see me on X at JFK Paine, or jfkpaine.com. And the movie's, again, called The Assassination of Mrs. Paine. Came out a couple years ago, but a lot of people still have never heard of it. It's sort of underground film. But yeah, I think it's a good intro to the topic. You know, Ruth Paine's story is like a window into the bigger topic of the JFK assassination, which can be kind of intimidating and overwhelming. But
yeah, that's one good thing I liked about the film is it was more focused than the Oliver Stone movie, for example. Like, which is because understandably there's so much, so I get it. But it's a good place to start. I agree. All right, everyone, have a great rest of the evening, and thanks for joining. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks.